The young white officer slammed the metal handcuffs around the 71-year-old black grandmother's thin wrists with enough force to make her wince. Officer Brett Donovan was 28 years old. He had been on the police force for 6 years. He stood 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighed 240 pounds. The grandmother in his grip was barely 5 feet tall. She weighed 104 pounds. She was wearing a simple flowered church dress and a small straw hat. "Ma'am, you are being detained for suspected shoplifting. Do not resist. Do not say a word. Walk to the front of the store with me right now." The grandmother did not resist. She did not cry. She did not say a word. She just walked slowly toward the front of Whitman's department store on Magnolia Avenue with the young officer holding her arm. 23 other customers in the store stopped to watch. 3 of them had their cell phones out and were already recording. The store manager, a 46-year-old white man named Gregory Pemberton, walked behind the officer with his arms crossed. He had been the one who had called the police 14 minutes earlier. The truth was that the grandmother had not put a single item into her purse. She had been quietly looking at a display of Sunday dresses for almost 20 minutes. She had picked up 3 different dresses. She had carried them to the dressing room. She had tried 2 of them on. She had decided that none of them fit her properly. She had returned all 3 dresses to the same display rack. Then she had walked to the small jewelry counter near the front of the store. She had been looking at a pair of simple gold cross earrings when Officer Brett Donovan had walked up behind her and grabbed her arm. Officer Donovan walked the grandmother out the front door of the store. The cold November wind hit her face. Her small straw hat almost flew off her head. She did not have a free hand to catch it. The young officer pushed her toward the back seat of his patrol car. Just before he opened the door, the grandmother turned her head slowly. She looked up at the young officer. Her eyes were quiet and steady. And then she whispered one short sentence so softly that only Officer Donovan could hear it. He froze. His face went completely white. He let go of her arm. He took 2 steps backward. The handcuff key in his hand started shaking so hard he almost dropped it. "Before this story breaks your heart and rebuilds it again, do me one small favor. If you believe a grandmother's quiet voice can carry more weight than a young man's badge, hit that like button right now and subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing. Now let's rewind. Because to understand what that small black grandmother whispered to the young officer in the parking lot of Whitman's department store that afternoon, you have to know exactly who she was. Her name was Mrs. Ruth Harris. She was 71 years old. She had been born and raised in a small town in rural Alabama. Her father had been a sharecropper. Her mother had been a domestic worker for a wealthy white family. Ruth had grown up with 5 brothers and sisters in a 4-room wooden house with no running water. But Ruth had been blessed with one thing her parents did not have. She had been blessed with a sharp mind. She had earned a scholarship to Tuskegee University in 1972. She had earned a master's degree in education from the University of Alabama in 1976. She had then spent 38 years as a public school teacher in the Birmingham, Alabama school district. She had retired 6 years ago at the age of 65. Ruth had also raised 1 daughter, a quiet girl named Vanessa who had grown up watching her mother grade papers at the kitchen table every single night until midnight. Vanessa had decided very young that she also wanted to dedicate her life to public service. She had gone to law school. She had become a prosecutor. She had spent 18 years quietly working her way up through the criminal justice system. Then, 2 years ago, Vanessa Harris had been appointed by the governor of Alabama to a position that nobody in her family had ever imagined possible. Vanessa Harris was now the Attorney General of the state of Alabama, the first black woman to ever hold that position in the history of the state, the most powerful state law enforcement official in Alabama, the boss of every single sheriff, the boss of every single state trooper, the boss of every single prosecutor in the entire state, and the boss, indirectly through state oversight, of every single municipal police department in Alabama, including the small police department of Officer Brett Donovan. Vanessa had begged her mother Ruth to move to a nicer apartment after her appointment 2 years ago. She had offered to pay for a beautiful new condominium. Ruth had refused. "Vanessa, baby, the good Lord blessed me with a small 2-bedroom house in this neighborhood. I have lived here for 40 years. My church is 2 blocks away. I am not moving anywhere just because my daughter got a fancy new title." Vanessa had also begged her mother to accept a small security detail. Ruth had refused that too. "Sweetheart, The day I need a young man with a gun to walk me to the grocery store is the day the Lord can come and take me home. That afternoon, Ruth Harris had walked the 4 blocks from her small house to Whitman's department store. She had been planning to buy a new Sunday dress for an upcoming event at her church. She had also been planning to buy a small pair of gold cross earrings as a gift for her granddaughter. She had not been planning to be handcuffed in the parking lot of a store she had been shopping at for 40 years. Officer Brett Donovan had been called to Whitman's department store at 2:47 in the afternoon by the store manager Gregory Pemberton. Gregory had been the manager of Whitman's for 9 years. He had a quiet pattern of calling the police on black customers. The store's security records showed that Gregory had personally called the police 17 times in the last 3 years. 16 of those calls had been about black customers. 14 of those 16 had resulted in no charges being filed. That afternoon, Gregory Pemberton had been watching Ruth Harris on the security cameras for almost 20 minutes. He had not watched the white woman 2 aisles over who had quietly slipped a $40 bottle of perfume into her oversized purse. He had not watched the white teenager who had walked out the front door wearing a brand new pair of jeans she had taken from the dressing room. He had only watched Ruth Harris, the 71-year-old black grandmother in the flowered church dress. Officer Brett Donovan had arrived at the store at 3:01. Gregory Pemberton had told him that Ruth had definitely put something into her purse. Officer Donovan had not asked Gregory to show him the security camera footage. He had not asked any of the other customers in the store if they had seen Ruth do anything suspicious. He had simply walked over to Ruth at the jewelry counter, grabbed her arm, and announced that she was being detained for shoplifting. He had not asked to look in her purse. He had simply put the handcuffs on her. Now, in the parking lot of Whitman's department store, Officer Brett Donovan stood frozen with the handcuff key shaking in his hand. The small black grandmother in the flowered dress had just whispered one short sentence to him. Officer Donovan looked at her one more time. He swallowed hard. His voice came out cracked and small. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. Could you please repeat what you just said?" Ruth Harris looked up at him calmly. She repeated the 9 words. "My daughter is the Attorney General of Alabama, son." Officer Donovan's stomach dropped. He had heard the name Vanessa Harris 1,000 times in the last 2 years. Every police department in the entire state of Alabama had received an internal memo from the Attorney General's office 6 months ago. The memo had laid out a new statewide review process for any incident involving a black citizen and excessive police force. Officer Donovan had read it personally. He had thrown it in the trash can next to his desk. He had laughed about it with 2 other officers in the break room. He had made a comment that he was not going to take orders from some black woman in Montgomery. That same Attorney General was the daughter of the small black grandmother whose wrists he had just handcuffed in front of 23 witnesses with 3 cell phone cameras recording. Officer Donovan unlocked the handcuffs immediately. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely get the key into the lock. He removed the cuffs. He took another step backward. "Ma'am, Mrs. Harris, I am so sorry. There has been a terrible mistake. Please, let me drive you home, please." Ruth Harris rubbed her thin wrists slowly. The handcuffs had left small red marks on her skin. She looked at Officer Brett Donovan with eyes that had seen 71 years of segregated drinking fountains, segregated schools, and segregated waiting rooms. She did not raise her voice. She simply spoke with the calm authority of a woman who had earned every single moment of dignity she possessed. "Son, you are not going to drive me home. You are going to walk back into that store with me right now. You are going to stand quietly while I finish my shopping. And then you are going to escort me back to my own car so that I do not have to be afraid of being handcuffed again on the way to the parking lot. Do you understand me, son?" Officer Brett Donovan nodded. He could not speak. He simply walked behind Ruth Harris back into Whitman's department store. The 23 customers were still watching. Ruth Harris walked back to the jewelry counter. She picked up the small pair of gold cross earrings. She walked to the cash register. She paid for the earrings in cash from her small flowered purse. The total came to $36.47. She paid with a $50 bill. She accepted her change. She walked out of the store with Officer Brett Donovan walking quietly 3 steps behind her. She got into her own car. She drove herself home. What Ruth Harris did not know was that a 43-year-old white woman named Patricia Hayes had been one of the 3 customers in Whitman's department store that afternoon, recording the entire incident on her cell phone. Patricia Hayes happened to be a freelance journalist. By 7 o'clock that evening, Patricia had emailed her video footage to 3 different news outlets. By 9 o'clock that evening, the video had been picked up by every local Alabama news network. By 11 o'clock that evening, somebody had quietly emailed the same video footage to the Attorney General's office in Montgomery. By 7 o'clock the next morning, Vanessa Harris was sitting at her kitchen table in Montgomery, watching the video of her own 71-year-old mother being handcuffed, and walked out of a department store like a common criminal. Vanessa Harris did not call her mother right away. She did not call the chief of police. She did not call the governor. She simply walked into her home office. She closed the door. And then the most powerful state law enforcement official in the state of Alabama sat down at her desk and cried for almost 20 straight minutes. Then she wiped her tears, picked up the phone, and made 3 phone calls. By 9 o'clock that morning, the Alabama Attorney General's office had formally opened a state-level investigation into the police department, where Officer Brett Donovan worked. By 11 o'clock, every single arrest report Officer Donovan had filed in the last 6 years involving a black citizen had been requested for review. By 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the same investigation had been expanded to include the 17 previous police calls made by Gregory Pemberton at Whitman's department store over the last 3 years. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, the corporate headquarters of the Whitman's department store chain had received an official inquiry from the Alabama Attorney General's office. Within 72 hours, Officer Brett Donovan had been placed on unpaid administrative leave. Within 30 days, he had been formally terminated. The Internal Affairs review of his 6-year career found that he had used unjustified force against 23 different black citizens during arrests. 11 of those cases were reopened by the Attorney General's office for criminal review. Officer Donovan was eventually charged with 3 separate counts of civil rights violations. His police certification was permanently revoked. Gregory Pemberton was also fired by Whitman's department store within 48 hours. The corporate office launched a complete internal investigation. They found his pattern of calling the police on black customers. They found 3 other store managers across the chain with similar patterns. The corporate office launched a comprehensive bias training program across all 412 Whitman's locations nationwide. The new training program was designed by Vanessa Harris's office. Whitman's department store also paid Ruth Harris a private settlement of an undisclosed amount. Ruth Harris donated the entire settlement to the Birmingham Public School District for new books for 2nd-grade classrooms. 6 months after the incident, Ruth Harris was invited to speak at the swearing-in ceremony for 47 new police officers in Birmingham. The 71-year-old grandmother stood at the wooden podium in her Sunday dress with the small gold cross earrings she had bought at Whitman's that afternoon. She looked out at the new officers and their families. She spoke for only 4 minutes. "Officers, I am Mrs. Ruth Harris. I am 71 years old. I taught 2nd grade in the city for 38 years. 6 months ago, a young officer just like the ones sitting in front of me today put a pair of handcuffs around my thin wrists in front of 23 witnesses. Because a white store manager decided that an old black grandmother in a flowered church dress did not look like she belonged in his store. The young officer did not ask me a single question. He did not check the security cameras. He did not even ask my name. He simply put me in handcuffs because somebody else told him that I belonged there. Officers, the badge you are about to put on your chests today is not just a piece of metal. It is the trust of every single grandmother in this city. The day you decide that a small black woman in a flowered dress does not deserve the same dignity as anybody else in your jurisdiction is the day you should turn that badge in. So here is what I want to leave you with tonight. Officer Brett Donovan handcuffed a small black grandmother in front of 23 witnesses because he believed she was a criminal. He did not know that the grandmother in the flowered dress had taught 2nd grade for 38 years. He did not know that her daughter was the Attorney General of the entire state of Alabama. He did not know that her wrists had earned more dignity than his entire career as a police officer would ever be able to give back to her. Think about the Ruth Harrises in your community right now. The quiet, older black women in flowered Sunday dresses who walk into department stores looking for a new outfit for church. The grandmothers who taught 2nd grade for 38 years, and who raised the very prosecutors and attorneys general we now depend on to keep us safe. The world has been deciding their worth based on the clothes they wear and the color of their skin for 70 years. The world has been wrong every single time. If this story moved you tonight, do me one final favor. Smash that like button. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. And drop a comment below telling me about a Ruth in your own life. The quiet grandmother in the flowered dress whose 9 quiet words could stop a young officer in his tracks. Because the world is full of grandmothers who raised the very people we depend on to fix the very systems that just tried to humiliate them. And the only question that matters tonight is whether we are humble enough to honor them long before we ever find out who their daughters turned out to become. See you in the next story.